Continuing on with our discussion of trench warfare, let's name two examples. Great to have examples during an essay about why the war was so difficult, long, and drawn out. All right, first, the Battle of Verdun, which was from February to December of 1916. First, before we even talk about the details of the battle, just notice the dates. That is an incredibly long time for one conflict. Okay, even more incredible, though, is the casualty rate, right? France loses an entire 540,000 men just in this conflict alone, in Germany for 30,000. Okay, the strategy. Germany wanted to bleed France white, it said. It just wanted to continue to kill French to force them to sue for peace. However, in Germany's effort to do so, of course, it loses so many of its own soldiers. All right, another just side note to be aware of is that a military hero on the French side emerges. His name is General Philippe Pétain, okay, because he keeps France holding on to Verdun despite Germany's attack. Another prominent example of a very devastating war, or battle that is the Battle of the Somme. Again, look at the long date range here. What's interesting about this, the Allies technically are victorious as a result of the Battle of the Somme, but still, look how small the advance of the front is. 125 square miles is nothing when you consider the scope of Europe. What's even more significant, of course, is the casualty rate. Again, significant losses even for the victors. Another really important part of our discussion of the First World War is all the technological advances that had occurred prior to the outbreak of war. All this industrialization, the German and British arms race, is going to result in a lot of technological innovations. And these, unfortunately, are going to make the war that much more deadly because the technology is more advanced than the actual military strategy. Remember the sort of old battle plans where both sides lined up facing one another and started to fire? Well, that wasn't as deadly as it could have been because weapons were not particularly precise or deadly. Now when you have things like tanks and airplanes and machine guns, many more people are going to fall, and you're not going to be able to advance the front very quickly. All right, quick examples of these military innovations. First, the machine gun. Right, arguably one of the most important reasons for the crazy casualty rates that you see on both sides. If you did emerge from underneath the trenches and you found yourself up on ground level, the likelihood that you would be mowed down by machine gun fire was incredibly high. The Germans started to use machine guns first, but then other countries quickly start to realize the potential of that power. Okay, so this rapid fire by the machine guns, you don't have to worry about reloading, much faster killing process. Also tanks, all right, an example of mobile artillery, all right. Previous wars, their artillery took the form of cannons. You can't easily move a cannon back and forth, but tanks are able to move relatively quickly, of course, compared to a cannon, and can be very destructive, and they can also move around sort of treacherous terrain. Okay, it's also, of course, going to contribute to the destruction of all the landscape as well. You have airplanes first being used during the First World War. Okay, these airplanes are going to be equipped with weapons. They are going to have pistols and rifles attached to them so you can fire upon targets from the air. All right, Germany develops the first fighter plane. It's called the Fokker, and what that actually does is it allows the people in the plane to fire machine guns from them, because these planes are propeller planes, right? So you have to make sure that the propellers and the machine guns are synchronized, so you're not actually shooting the propellers, right? And they're able to do that. You're also going to see that Britain is going to use planes to start bombing Zeppelin bases. We'll talk about Zeppelins in a moment in Germany. So basically, you can target someone from above. This is also going to result in a lot of civilian casualties during the war. I just think this picture is interesting because the horse has a gas mask on too. But this is also going to be the first war that utilizes chemical warfare, right? The use of mustard gas in particular. Again, surprise, surprise, the Germans are using this stuff first. Think about how quickly the Germans are militarizing. Okay? Now, again, for every technological innovation, you tend to see some sort of response, right? Now, because after the effects of mustard gas were quickly understood, people responded to that, and mustard gas was not nearly as deadly because people were able to invent masks to prevent the damage. All right, U-boats or submarines. Okay, again, initially used by Germany. They were devastating not only for war but also for trade. Okay, they oftentimes were used to attack merchant vessels of the Allies to, of course, try to restrict their economic interactions. Britain and Russia eventually are going to develop their own submarines because the Germans are using a lot of U-boats, and eventually they also are going to fire upon neutral ships at certain points. It's going to get the U.S. involved in the war eventually. We'll talk about that in a little while. Zeppelins, you may know them as blimps, okay? They, again, were used by Germany at first. They, again, were a way that you could bomb from overhead. Zeppelins were used to bomb London as well as other civilian targets. Okay, but eventually technology comes up with the response to the Zeppelin. They start using exploding shells to destroy Zeppelins when they're in the air. Okay, last but not least, technical innovation is the use of the radio. Okay, now you have this wireless form of technology, so you can communicate quickly in the battlefield, exchange orders, give statistics, explain whenever some sort of backup or more materials are needed. However, not everybody gets equal access to radio. Russia lags behind, does not have radio capability. And when Germany realizes this, it exploits Russia's lack of radio and actually starts to tap into Russia's phone lines, and then it gets word of Russian battle plans. All right, now the war is going to expand in scope. We already talked about some of the initial alliances, but I returned to this map again to show us other countries that get involved. Turkey is going to join the Central Powers. Why? Because Turkey doesn't like Russia. Bulgaria is going to join the Central Powers too because Bulgaria and Serbia do not get along. Italy is going to join the Triple Entente. Why? Because it is interested in some Austrian territory. So Italy breaks off with the Triple Alliance, joins the Entente. Japan, not on the map, but eventually Japan is going to join the Triple Entente, and this is largely due to colonial interests in the region. It helps get rid of German colonies in China and elsewhere in the Pacific. Okay, there's also some conflicts on the Eastern Front that we should be aware of. Okay, there's a Battle of Tannenberg, which is in the Eastern Russian region. All right, you're going to see that the Russians get defeated by the Germans at the Battle of Tannenberg in 1914. All right, the Russians are going to be really, really unsuccessful in the First World War, and Tannenberg is going to be seen as sort of a turning of the tide for Russia in the First World War. Another really, really good example of Russia's failure in the First World War is just the year 1915. There were 2.5 million casualties just in 1915 among the Russians. Okay, and historians argue that it was because the Russians were not particularly well organized militarily. They also, again, they're not technologically ready for that kind of war. There are examples in history where Russians were sent into battle with absolutely no weapons at all, and they were responsible for picking the arms off of the dead, which is just incredibly crazy to think about, that they would be sent to battle and their country would not actually equip them. So this is going to cause Russia to back out of the war early. This also relates to the Russian Revolution, which we'll get to in the future. Okay, so Russia is actually going to pull out of the war and enter into a separate peace with Germany in March of 1918. It signs the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. And so the reason why that is because Russia has its own internal revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, which we'll talk about in a moment. But Russia, really, it's deciding to end the war at any price, because you're going to see in a future map how much territory Russia loses as a result of this treaty. They also lose a lot of people. Okay, other campaigns, other theaters of war. The Gallipoli campaign. Again, at this point now, it's the British who want to get access to the Dardanelles Strait. This is a sort of zoom out of where we are. So this is a connector between the Adriatic Sea and the Black Sea, this strait here. Okay, so the British are going to go after this area. They're going to try to, eventually their goal is to take Constantinople and defeat the Turks. However, the Gallipoli campaign fails. The Australians try to help, but ultimately 200,000 British are killed or wounded in this failed campaign. There's also going to be efforts in the Middle East. Again, this is going to be an attempt to defeat the Turks. All right. Now, the Ottoman Empire, of course, at its height, expanded into many Arab countries. Okay, so a British officer named T.E. Lawrence, or you may know him culturally as Lawrence of Arabia, ends up going into these Arab countries and encouraging them to revolt against the Turks who had been ruling over them for such a long period of time. Because he successfully got these Arabs to start to revolt against the Turks, this is eventually going to lead to the defeat of the Ottoman Empire at the end of World War I. All right, so again, the Arabs are excited about the potential to gain emancipation from Turkish rule. All right, another important, it's not so much a theater of war, but a really important battle strategy is the naval blockade that the Allies issue against Germany in particular, but the Central Powers overall. All right, what's a great way to kind of strangle a country or an alliance if you can't do so militarily entirely? Well, block their trade networks, right? So the Allies are going to issue a blockade to try to just completely halt any of the Central Powers from their regular trade. What they're going to do is the British have a superior fleet compared to these other countries, and so they're going to basically try to also cut Germany off from its colonial empire in Africa, and Germany is going to respond by using its U-boats to sink a bunch of Allied vessels. Now this comes to a head in 1950, not 1918. 1915, when the Germans sink a British passenger liner, a neutral liner, called the Lusitania. All right, there were 128 Americans on board the Lusitania as well, and so, or that got killed, that is, on the Lusitania. So this also angers the Americans. Okay, so because Germany is bombing neutral ships, or sinking neutral ships with its U-boats, this is going to cause the U.S. to eventually get involved in the war, okay, because they want to stop unrestricted submarine warfare, basically a policy that Germany had started as of 1917, where they just would essentially, without any kind of limitations, use their U-boats to stop Allied ships, regardless of whether or not they had a military affiliation. Lastly, we need to think about how the Allies are getting involved with the Russian Revolution as well. We'll get back to this in a little while. But under the Archangel Expedition, we're going to see that the Allies want to stop the Bolsheviks, or the communists, from taking over Russia. So when the Bolsheviks are going to war against other non-Bolshevik Russians in the Civil War, the Allies are going to send their troops into Russia in multiple places. They're going to invade from the north or into the north. They're also going to send some troops into Siberia because, first off, they don't want the Japanese to get control of the region. They want to have control. It doesn't matter that they're allies with Japan. They want to have control over Siberia. There were Czech soldiers that were stuck in Siberia. The allies also are meant to rescue them. And they also don't want the Bolsheviks to go in there to get more weapons. Effectively, what the Archangel Expedition does is it makes the Russian Civil War longer, and the Allies are not successful.